Now, a couple days back, Mark Ruffalo, who, as you probably know, plays Bruce Banner and the Hulk in the MCU, and he's going to be reprising that role in the upcoming She-Hulk series on Disney+. While he had some interesting things to say in an interview with Metro when asked about the amount of content being cranked out by Marvel lately, and he even took a bit of a shot at Star Wars for reasons, I'm not sure why, but we'll get into that a bit too. But anyway, I think his comments lead to a few interesting questions, chief among them being just how long will this current age of entertainment, the shared universe era, let's call it, how long will it ultimately last, or will it ever end? Which is a question I hope you will all answer or weigh in on in the comments below when I'm done with my, shall we call it, opening ramble here. And so to jump right into things, let's read what he had to say. Again, when being asked about how much content Marvel is releasing, it's not something I worry about. I understand that these things run their course and then something else comes along. But the thing Marvel has done well is that inside the MCU, just as they do with the comic books, they let a director or an actor sort of recreate each piece to their own style, their likeness. He then went on to say, if you watch a Star Wars, you're pretty much going to get the same version of Star Wars each time. It might have a little bit of humor, it might have a little bit of different animation, but you're always really in that same kind of world. But with Marvel, you can have a whole different feeling even within the Marvel universe. Okay, so first of all, in a way, I do sort of agree with him. I think one of the things that Marvel, or the MCU, has done really, really well, one of the reasons it has endured for almost 15 years now, is that it does, in a way, vary the feeling of its movies to some degree. And I suppose you can thank the different directors and actors for that, as he says, or credits. Either way, even though, yeah, they're obviously all superhero films, they nevertheless do tend to fall into different, let's call them, subgenres. In other words, they don't all have the exact same tone and or feeling to them. Captain American Winter Soldier, for example, feels a hell of a lot different than Guardians of the Galaxy does, as an Ant-Man film is going to feel different from a Doctor Strange one. That said, in another way, he's a pot calling the kettle black, because even if we just concede that all Star Wars is the same, or whatever, more on that in a bit, when you start to dissect a Marvel film or look past those kind of subgenres they fall into, which yes, do provide different tones, what you end up with is pretty much the exact same story each and every single time. The same formula is used with almost every single MCU film ever made, and that probably will ever be made. Which is, you introduce or reestablish your hero, hopefully making them likable or relatable. Then you insert a conflict, usually a villain that poses some sort of threat to the greater good, one that seems, at least at first, to be too difficult for our hero to stop or handle. And then, after some struggle in making us fear for the hero and the greater good, the hero manages to defeat the villain and either learns something about themselves to progress their character, or they suffer some sort of loss along the way to, again, progress the character for their next go-around. And yeah, when broken down to this level of simplicity, introduce character or characters, insert conflict, overcome conflict, and grow, a lot of movies or stories are the exact same thing. And of course the key is to make it stand out somehow, to make it feel unique or different in some way, to tell the same basic story in a way that's exciting or that's never been done quite that way or quite that well before. Which is essentially what the first Star Wars film did. It took perhaps the most classic type of story there is, the hero's journey, and did it in a way that had never been done before, and more or less the whole original trilogy is the same way. It's actually little to no different when broken down to those basic parts or to its most basic structure. It's no different than your average MCU film. It's a story of a hero defeating a villain and saving the day, saving the greater good, but suffering a loss along the way. But for Mark Ruffalo to kind of imply that all Star Wars is the exact same thing, that I couldn't disagree more with. I mean, the prequels are the hero's journey kind of flipped on its head. Our main character, the central hero of the whole story, Anakin Skywalker, he becomes the bad guy in the end. And the other good guys, well, a lot of them die, and those who do manage to survive do only that. They only survive to, at best, hopefully fight another day. But I suppose when we look again at what exactly he said, he's not actually saying that the story of Star Wars is always the same. He's saying the world is always the same, even though it's a whole galaxy. And that Marvel always feels different, I guess. But again, I have to disagree with him, because not only does Star Wars have many, many different distinct feeling settings in universe, many different planets and such, again, it's a whole galaxy, but the content itself does feel different. And I'm not just talking about how watching The Mandalorian feels different from watching, say, one of the saga or trilogy films, whatever you want to call them, but even the two trilogies from Lucas, the prequels and the OT, both have different feelings to them. In fact, one of the biggest complaints many had against the prequels was that they didn't feel enough like the original Star Wars trilogy, which was intentional. Lucas had said he didn't want to do the same thing all over again, and he even criticized the sequel trilogy for, well, not being very original or pushing the boundaries. Not to mention here, you do want them to feel like they are in the same world or universe. You don't want every piece of Star Wars content to feel so different from every other piece that you don't get the feeling that they are in the very same galaxy from a long time ago. You want that interconnectivity. That's the point of a shared universe, after all. And honestly, and I say this as a big fan of what they've done, but I do think Marvel or the MCU is losing a bit of that interconnected feeling lately and is expanding maybe too much. It's getting a bit too big for itself or for one planet. And yes, I do realize there is cosmic and multiverse stuff as well. Not everything is on or centered around Earth. I just mean that when I watch a show or movie and there's some kind of great, huge threat to the entire planet, I can't help but wonder, where are all of the other heroes? Why can't they come help the hero who just so happens to be the name or have their name in the title of the movie? If a bunch of bad guys are threatening New York City, for example, why is only Spider-Man on the case? And don't get me wrong, the comics have always suffered from this very same problem, and there's even more heroes and mutants in the comics than there are in the MCU by a long shot. You also have to wonder why anyone would ever still live in New York City, which has been destroyed so many times in the comics that it's just ridiculous at this point. And maybe they live there because it always just seems to sort of rebuild itself for the next issue. But seriously, and to their credit, it seems like the MCU is trying to, I guess you could say, address this problem the same way that comic books kind of do, by having different categories of heroes, everything from street level on up to the cosmic level stuff. And soon enough, if Miss Marvel is meant to be a hint, we'll have mutants as well, though it'll be fun to see how they work them in, considering how much history they have in the world itself, how integrated they are to the past. Or maybe if they try to work them in at all quite yet. Because if I had to guess, I'd say that after Phase 6, after the end of Secret Wars and the end of the multiverse saga, as they're calling it, we're going to reset things. We're going to reset everything and just have one single universe again where everything can matter again, if you will. And this will be a new universe of sorts where things like mutants can be there or have been there from the very start, and where we can recast a lot of the heroes who are, maybe their actors are getting too old or whatever the case may be, and we can use these same heroes all over again, and so the MCU can just go on indefinitely. But can it actually do that? And so going back to the question I posed at the beginning, how long do you think the MCU and or Star Wars can last? I mean, some of these characters have been around in the comics for decades, nearly a century in the case of some DC heroes. And as I've asked before, does the MCU and Star Wars, how big they are today, do they kind of stand in the way of the next big thing, the next Star Wars or the next MCU? The next thing that can take the classic tale and spin it in a new way, a new, unique, and interesting way that can take the world by storm like they have or did. And I'm certainly not saying that I want to see Marvel and Star Wars die already. I'm not saying that at all. I am a huge fan of both of them, despite the fact that, yes, I do criticize both of them. Not that they ever truly will die. I think they will always endure and exist in some capacity, or will for the foreseeable future at the very least. But how long can they hold or hog the spotlight? I mean, if Disney has their way, it'll be literally forever. Having that built-in guaranteed fan base with every piece of content you put out is always better in their eyes than taking a risk on something new or trying to create something brand new. But is there a point where enough people will check out that it won't be profitable anymore? And if so, when and how will that finally happen? Well, that's all I've got for this time. Now it's your turn to take to the comments below and tell me what you think. And I'll be very curious on this one to see how long you think the MCU and Star Wars can ultimately last for. How long will we keep getting new shows and movies and new content in general? And yeah, I know many think it's already on its way out, and maybe they are. Maybe they are all but dead and the age of the shared universe is already coming to an end. But I think we all know that Disney will milk it for all it's worth, and I do wonder what could be the sort of final blow, what could ultimately end these two franchises and usher in a new sort of era, or just a new property to take their place. Whatever the case may be, leave your comments below and let's talk some Star Wars and some Marvel. And until next time, thanks for watching.